We're talking about relationships, and we're basing it on the fact that relationships is the root of every problem in the world. We're talking about relationship between the sexes, and our point was that God thought up and created two sexes. God was the one that created this. It came out of His understanding. Now, one of the problems in relationships is that really, even though we are not evolutionists, our thinking and so much of the teaching on human relationships has been influenced by a deterministic evolutionary thinking. Deterministic and evolutionary meaning whatever's going to happen is going to happen. If you have a biblical Christian worldview on relationships, you realize that things are not that inevitable. What we believe is that there is a very wise and very benevolent or very loving God who thought things up and who designed them and created them. So notice that I've said two sexes, not three, not 1.5, not 2.5, but two sexes. That's the way God designed things. Now, the reason this is an important point is because we have an issue, two issues in our society, one of which is a growing problem with homosexuality and lesbianism. And this is something that is very difficult for us to deal with within the church, because on one hand we have a tremendous harshness and rejection, and on the other hand we have a compromise and a tolerance that shows compassion for, seeks to show compassion for humans in their situation, but does not show compassion and love for the Father and for God because of what He created and how He runs things. And so homosexuality and lesbianism is a growing problem. If there are 100 people in this room, there would be 10 people in this room who had been involved homosexually. That is the trend, and that is the amount that this is believed. Now, even if you don't have a problem with homosexuality and lesbianism, all of us are touched by this other problem, and that is what we call inferiority, where we say, am I man enough? Am I woman enough? Am I everything I ought to be as a woman? Am I everything I ought to be as a man? And a huge amount of what we do in relationships and the attitudes that we have in relationships come from this whole idea of inferiority. There are lots of people out there tonight who will commit immoral acts, not because they really want to be immoral, but because they're trying to prove something. There are a lot of people who do really stupid things, who get involved in things that they shouldn't get involved in, and they know they shouldn't be involved in. A lot of drugs and alcohol abuse, a lot of things that we do and we get bound up in have to do because we have deep inferiority, that we're not at everything we ought to be. We don't have the right body size, we don't have the right color, we don't have the right background. We're not sure about our performance, whether it's up to snuff or not. Will I be a good wife? Will I be a good husband? Will I be a good lover? Am I good? Am I not so good? Am I ugly? Am I pretty? Am I handsome? Whatever. And it leads to a tremendous amount of competition, depression, and all of the correlated problems. Now, these two problems are helped along by two what I call twisted truths. I call them twisted truths because in themselves they are truth, but the way they are spoken to your mind by the devil is twisted. The first thing the devil says to you is, you are different. You are different. You're not like other men. You're not like other women. You are really different. All other men like to play this sport, and you have never been interested in it. What's wrong with you? All men like to get their hands dirty with grease and oil. And if you were a real man, you'd be like that. What's wrong with you? You are different. You're a woman. You've never liked to play with dolls and never liked little lacy things and things within your culture that say that this is a typical girl thing. What's wrong with you? You are different. And then he also says to you, accept yourself. Accept yourself. Come out of the closet. Be honest. Accept the fact that you're not like other women. Accept the fact that you're not like other men. And when you accept this twisted truth, you often do convert. You literally change. And yes, there are people who from the earliest stages of their life have felt like they are not a real man and they have felt like they are not a real woman. The fact that it begins early in life doesn't mean anything. I can remember the very earliest stages of my life feeling deeply inferior because I wore glasses and because I was skinny. And I never felt like I was acceptable or ever fit in or that anybody ever liked me. So we have these inferiorities, and they even have to do with our sexual orientation very early in life. That doesn't mean that's what's true about us just because it begins early in life. It simply means that the enemy is expert at lying to you and saying you're unacceptable, you're not tall enough, you're not big enough, you're not skinny enough, you're not what you ought to be. And he does the same thing in terms of you're not a real man or you're not a real woman. And then he suggests to you, accept yourself. And whenever you accept something that is not what God actually made, you do change. You do conform yourself according to the lie. And that's what's happening. And it doesn't matter whether it's sexual orientation or it's just poor self-image. Don't accept what is not the truth. What is the truth? How do we determine truth? There's only two ways to determine truth. One is that God created and thought it up and established it, and we either agree with it or disagree with it, or we decide what truth is for ourselves. And that's where we are in our society right now, is where people have decided to be their own gods individually. We worship the God of the individual human today, which means truth is what you decide it is. Well, that's not the way it is. The biblical Christian worldview is God establishes truth. So these are twisted truths. Now these two twisted truths are helped along, unfortunately, by two things within our society. One is what we might call social typecasting. Social typecasting. And the other one is what we might call media images. Media images. And these things change per era of time and area geographical. Social typecasting and media images. And social typecasting and media images change per era of time and change per area geographically. Now let me give you some illustrations of this. Social typecasting is nothing more or less than what a given society says is acceptable. A society in a particular area of the world might say, if you wear deodorant as a male, you show a lack of masculinity. And I can take you to societies right now where no male wears any deodorant or puts any nice smells on him, because this is not a manly thing to do. Now, if you're an American, you might be scoffing at this at the moment, but let me remind you something. In 1946, in this country of America, just after World War II, there was one brand of male deodorant for sale. So the whole idea of aftershaves and male deodorants and smells and that sort of thing is a recent, within this era, phenomenon. The point being that these kinds of things change per area and per era. Social typecasting. I can take you to countries where, and into tribes and societies where the man that the women all swoon over when he comes back to the village is the man who, on the last raiding party, has shot the most other men with arrows, cut their hearts out while they were still beating, and eaten them raw. Such a man. Oh, he's such a man. Now, in your culture, you say, oh, gross, oh, weird, that's so terrible. And yet, you'd be surprised how many people in this room associate masculinity with violence. Oh, my boyfriend, he's such a man, boy. You better not ever say that to him. He punches there. He put his fist through the sheetrock yesterday. I mean, he tore the door off the hinges. The thing won't open, boy. You better watch out. He punches his pickup door, and he's got big tires on his four-wheel drive. It is amazing how we associate violent action and forceful action with masculinity. And that's just a slight twist from tearing somebody's heart out while it's still beating. And so we say to our boys, you don't like football? You don't want to get in there and get hit? What's the matter with you, you pansy? You wuss? And what we do here is we are projecting a social typecasting which has produced tremendous wounding within the heart of thousands of little boys who felt like, well, maybe I am not masculine. Maybe I am not man. And out of the hurt and out of often the bitterness towards maleness and what they think it ought to be and what they know they can't be or don't want to be, they seal off within their orientation the whole concept of masculinity. And this is what leads to cross-dressing. This is what leads to a rejection of who you are. Social typecasting. I can take you to places where it's the person who is the lightest in color. There are literally people in Africa and India who stay out of the sun because the lightest complexion is the most desirable. I can take you to countries, would you believe, and cultures where people actually take most of their clothes off and lay down on a beach in the sun to make their skin darker. Because in that particular culture, evidently dark skin is a more desirable thing to have than light skin. What does this mean? It means that these social typecastings change per era and per area. What about media images? You're watching on the television some night, and somebody comes in one of these little sitcoms and says, oh, I was with a real woman tonight. What a lot of woman. Boy, she's a lot of woman, I'll tell you. And every girl in the place looks at themselves and says, I wonder if I'm a lot of woman or I'm just a woman. Or you see the female come in and she says, man, I was with a real hunk tonight. He is such a hunk. And every guy in the place says, I wonder if I'm a hunk of something. Or am I just a human being? These are media images of what is real masculine and what is real feminine. And what comes out of it is that most of us feel a little bit inferior. We feel like we don't quite measure up to that thing. Things change per area and era. I was raised in the state of Idaho. Mining, logging, potato raising, farming. If you ever got all of the grease out off of your fingernails in some of the societies around a state like that, you weren't really masculine. If you ever got all the cow manure off your boots, maybe you were lacking in your masculinity. These things change. I went to high school in the late 50s and early 60s. Now you know how old I am. Now, I have recently lived for 11 years in the state of Hawaii during the 1980s and 90s. Now, in Hawaii, I have been prone to, particularly during the early 80s, worn white pants and flowered shirts with all kinds of purples and pinks and stuff. Nobody seemed to have a problem with that in Hawaii in the 80s and 90s. But suppose I had worn my white pants and my flowered shirts to my high school in the late 50s in the state of Idaho. In that area and in that era of time, I would have been beaten up before I got out of the parking lot. Illustration of the fact that social typecasting of what is acceptable in masculinity and what is acceptable in femininity changes per era of time and per area geographically. When I grew up as a young man, in order to be an acceptable female, you had to be big. I grew up with movie stars like Marilyn Monroe and Jane Mansfield and Jane Russell and what became known later as the full-figured people. So we had females all the time stuffing things here and there, trying to be more feminine and trying to be bigger. And then we hit the 60s and a British model hit the scene called Twiggy. And since that time, in order to be an acceptable female, you have to be a broomstick. And if you don't think that's an issue, one of the greatest neuroses in this country that even kills and takes the lives of many females every year is what? Anorexia and bulimia, and it's a huge problem. I want to tell you how effective the enemy is in saying you're not acceptable. You're not feminine enough. You're not masculine enough. You're not man enough. You're not going to make a good wife. You're not going to make a good husband. And that's the reason people are burying themselves in alcohol and drugs. That's the reason they're turning to all kinds of perverted lifestyles, is because they're confused and wounded within their orientations because of these projections that the enemy makes. And I'm trying to point out to you that you can't trust these things because they change per era and they change per area. I grew up when men who sang on the radio and sang songs sounded like men. They had manly voices. And then we had this guy come out called Tiny Tim, singing about tiptoeing through the tulips. And then we went to the Bee Gees, and they seemed to be fairly masculine individuals, and yet they sang like girls. And then we got to Boy George, and then to Michael Jackson, and now we don't know where we are. What's the point? The point is these things change. It has nothing to do with masculinity and femininity necessarily. It's that these standards change per era and per area. What this has led to, as I say, is a tremendous amount of confusion, a tremendous amount of hurt, and therefore a tremendous amount of I need to have society accept me for not being a real man. I need to have society accept me for not being a real woman because I'm now finally out of the closet and accepting myself. So what we have to do, like everything else, with all the problems we have, whether it's pornography or lust or whatever, we've got to go back into the mind of God and say, hey, where was God in the beginning? What did He think up and what did He create? So what today I'm going to do is I'm going to deal with this problem in your life so that you will never have any doubts for the rest of your life about whether or not you are a real man or a real woman. You ready for this? You will never compete. You will never feel inferior again because you're going to know what God made. God thought up and created two sexes. And so we are going to define for you today what is a real man and what is a real woman, so you will never doubt again whether or not you measure up. Agreed? Are you ready? You're about to find out whether you are 100% man or 100% woman, okay? Here it is. We will start with the girls. The definition of a real woman is a female one. And my dear sisters, if you are female at all, you're as much of a woman, has ever been a woman, will ever be a woman, can ever be a woman. And if you're not, please raise your hand and tell me who is. What is her bust size? What size of dress does she wear? Does she even want to wear dresses? Does she like lacy things or dream of climbing a telephone pole and driving an 18-wheeler? It doesn't matter what you do as an occupation. It doesn't matter what clothes you might prefer. If you are female, you are a woman. Believe it. Walk confidently in it. Know that you're as much of a woman as any woman has ever been a woman, will ever be a woman. Because if you're not, who is? And what we find is that we're often comparing ourselves to an illusion. Okay, what about the guys? A real man, of course, is a male man. Spelled M-A-L-E, so you don't attack the guy that brings the letters. And my dear brothers in this place, if you are male at all, you're as much of a man, has ever been a man, will ever be a man. And if you're not, please raise your hand and tell me who is more of a man than you are. And how can you tell? How much hair does he have on his chest? Does he like violent sporting events or does he not? What does he choose to do as an occupation? Does he want to get grease on his fingers or does he want to do interior decorating? It doesn't matter. You're as much of a man, has ever been a man, will ever be a man. God created two sexes, and you are one of those sexes. You're not 50%, you're not even 99%. You are 100% female or you're 100% male. Nobody is less than that. If we were evolutionists, then you might just evolve and then whatever happens, happened and there's nothing you can do about it. If we're evolutionists, then you might be a female trapped in a male body or a male trapped in a female body. But if we believe in a designer who thought it up and created it, then we have to understand what he thought up and what he created, and he made two sexes and you were one of them. If you don't know which one, come up here afterwards and I might be able to help you. But I got another suggestion for you. If you don't want to do that, go home in front of a mirror, take off all your clothes, and look in the mirror, and what you see, believe it. Very simple. What you see in the mirror when you take all your clothes off is a fact. And you're only going to see one of two things in the mirror. You're going to see a female or you're going to see a male. And you have to believe and have confidence in what the mirror tells you is a fact so that you can live out what the mirror tells you. God made two sexes. Now, you're going to have some people say to you, but what about homosexuals and lesbians who claim that God made them this way? And what about the fact that they have discovered this strange chromosome and now they're thinking they've discovered something about the brain and so on? And some people have this chromosome, and the ones that have the chromosome, maybe that shows and proves that physiologically you are a homosexual. Listen, I want you to write this down on your paper. Nothing I am physically or emotionally causes me to violate God's truth. Nothing I am physically or emotionally causes me to violate God's truth. You say, if you say to me, well, I have the funny chromosome, therefore I have to be a homosexual or a lesbian, listen carefully, then that means only the people with the funny chromosome are homosexual. And nobody that doesn't have the funny chromosome is a homosexual. And in actual fact, we got a lot of people out there who are homosexual who don't have the funny chromosome. And we got a lot of people out there who have the funny chromosome who aren't homosexual. The point is, if we really check this out, we'll find that homosexuality has nothing to do necessarily with your physiology or your psychology. It has something to do with believing a lie compared to believing what the Creator thought up and created. And you need to, in your self-image, have an attitude that says, I didn't evolve, I didn't get to the place that I am by some kind of osmosis. I got here because God designed me. And yes, we live in a fallen world, and yes, we have lots of hurts and mix-ups, but in order to get out of our fallenness and in order to get out of the confusion and the hurt, we have to come to God and we have to measure up with what He thought and what He created, and He can heal us and strengthen us in our self-image so that we understand, so that we can walk in confidence with what God made us, and we won't have to be competing and comparing and putting one another down and putting ourselves down, but we'll be able to look in the mirror and say, thank you, God, for what you thought up and designed. It is very good. Amen? All right, I want to move on now to another section. Point number 2 in relationship between the sexes is God thought up and created the attraction between people. God thought up and created the attraction between people. Not only did God make males and females, but God made attraction. Now some of you may say, oh no, this can't be. I know that God made our sexual organs, and I know that God created our hormones, and God made us sexual beings. That's hard enough to believe. Some of the church has been confused over the years, thinking that sexuality and all kinds of hormonal function was the lower nature or was the flesh. But we have discovered in our last point that God created 2 sexes. He created sexuality. He made us hormonal beings. It has nothing to do with the fall. It has nothing to do with sin or the lower nature. It is a gift of God. But you say, the attraction, that's where everything gets in the problem. If we weren't attracted to each other, then there wouldn't be any of this immorality. There wouldn't be any of this lust. There wouldn't be any of this problem out there. So a lot of Christians think, well, if you get close to Jesus, if you really love the Lord, if you get really sanctified, if you get really filled with the Holy Spirit and walk in holiness, then you won't be attracted to people. And there's tremendous confusion here because of the world we live in, that we see all kinds of oppression of one another and all kinds of bondage in this area, and maybe our own backgrounds where we've been hurt in being attracted and we're a little bit confused. And so in order to straighten this out, we say, I don't care anything about men, I don't care anything about women, I don't care anything about being attracted. I just want to serve God. I just want to serve Jesus. I want to get my mind on the Lord, and I don't want to have any of this stuff. I was running a discipleship training school years ago, and a young man came to me and he said to me, I want to tell you right up front, I was a real womanizer. I was involved in a lot of immorality before I became a Christian. And he said, I've just recently become a Christian. I've come to this school here, and I just want to be open and honest with you about this. And he told me a lot of details about his background. And he said, so while I'm in this school, he says, I just want you to know I'm not going to have anything to do with women, because that's been a big problem in my life, and I'm just going to seek the Lord and get my mind on God. All of that stuff is in the past. So I said, well, that's okay. Although I thought he was going to go to a sort of an extreme, but sometimes it's necessary to go to an extreme depending on your background for a while. So during the course of the school, he was spending quite a bit of time with a particular person of the opposite sex, and he noticed that I noticed, so he came to me and he said to me, You'll notice that I spent quite a bit of time with Susie here, and he said, I just want you to know that there's no attraction. It's all in the Lord. Now, do you see the twisting there? In other words, if there's attraction, then it's not in the Lord. And if it's in the Lord, there won't be any attraction. That is the twisting that we have coming out of our own backgrounds and living in the fallen world where we see so much junk around us. So again, we've got to go back into the mind of God. What did God think up and what did God create? Because a lot of times we're attracted to each other and we say, I wonder if there's something wrong with me. People come to me all the time saying, would you pray for me, Dean? I think I have a demon. I say, well, why do you think you have a demon? Well, because I like girls. Or I like guys, and I'm attracted to them, and they seem to be attracted to me, and I think I must have a demon or something. Well, I'm sorry, I can't cast it out. You can't fast it away. It's not your lower nature. It's not the old self. It's not your sinful nature. It is something God created. And you'd be surprised how many theologians of the past have said all attraction to the opposite sex is flesh and needs to be done away with. And even in marriage, you should not be too attracted. You should just kind of have children and get it over with. So where are we on this stuff? Well, first of all, we have to understand what God has made before we can figure out how to use it. So, have you ever seen a little baby discover its hand? You bring this little glob of goo home from the hospital and you lay it down there, and the only thing it knows to do is to eat and have its diaper changed. Can't even see much, evidently. And then one day, great progress is made when it discovers it has an extremity. It goes something like this. It looks at this thing and bites on it, finds out it's hooked on. And literally, months from that day, that human being will be skillfully using that hand to put thread through a needle, to make microchips, to give money, to pat on the back, to give massages, to do all kinds of skillful things. But first it has to discover it has one before it can skillfully use it. Most Christians, most humans have never sat down and, like that baby, calculated and discovered and identified a functioning mechanism within your personality called an attraction gift. If you never discover that you have one, if you never identify it as a God-created functioning mechanism of your personality, you're always going to be confused, wondering whether or not you're still a little bit sinful, and wondering whether or not the rest of the people in the school or in the camp or in the church are feeling like you do, and never wanting to tell anybody that you're attracted because you think that there's some weakness in it. So we have to discover. Now let me help you identify with this. How many people in this room have ever noticed that you love a sunset? You come up over the brow of the hill and you say, oh, look at the colors. Oh, look at the beautiful sunset. Look at the colors that smog makes. Only one good thing I know about smog is it makes beautiful colors in the sunset. How many of you have ever noticed that you're attracted to beautiful mountains, lakes, rivers, seascapes? Hello? Flowers, smells, food. You like food, you smell it, you taste it. You can't wait for lunch, for dinner. Oh, yes, let's go out and get some of this. How many of you notice that you're attracted to beautiful music? You love the sounds and the beat. What about art, pictures, paintings, sculptures? Anybody notice this stuff? Now, what is that in your personality? It's amazing how many of us have kind of wondered, is this my flesh? Is this what flesh is? I'm really hungry, I want to eat, is that flesh? I really like the picture, is that flesh? I really like the sunset, is that flesh? No, it is a functioning mechanism within your personality called an attraction gift. To help you identify it, let me explain that other mammals, no matter how developed in their brain, don't have the same attraction. As far as we can tell, horses and cows do not really peruse the sunsets. I'm trying to help you distinguish between you and other mammals. You do not see dogs and pigs in the art gallery. I've seen some paintings I think they would enjoy, but you do not see them there. You do not see chickens and pigs at the symphony. Why? Because there is something uniquely placed in the human being. Many things. One of which is what we are terming today an attraction gift. This helps you distinguish, hey, there is something there. It is not sin. It is not the flesh. It is not a demon. It is a gift of God. Now, once the baby discovers it has a hand, the next step is it needs to find out how to use the hand. So what the parents often do is they tie some things above the baby's bed, and it sits there and looks at these things and finally discovers it can hit it. So it starts hitting all this stuff that's hung there. And then one day one of the parents shrieks from the bedroom because great progress is made, because this kid finds that he can close his hand around that thing and jerk on it. And they think this is wonderful. Oh, he's gripping. Look, he's knowing how he grips. He knows how to grip. The only problem is he grips everything in sight and in reach for the next 3 years. Now, what's happened is not only do we have an attraction gift and we've distinguished it, but we know how it works. You'd be surprised how many of us as Christians have never calculated how our attraction gift functions. It just sort of oozes out all over our life, and we don't ever direct it according to its proper function. So I want to suggest to you that your attraction gift has several functions. Number one, it is unique. It is unique. That is to say, we're not all attracted to the same things. Not only are you totally a unique original. Do you know why if a woman goes to Saks Fifth Avenue or Bloomingdale's in New York City and buys a dress for several $1,000s, it's not the fabric or the color or anything else. This is what they call a designer original. It's the only dress that's ever been made like that one. That's why it costs so much. And everybody in this room is a designer original. You have a unique set of fingerprints. You have a unique brain wave. You have a unique voice wave. They can actually distinguish you from any other human being that's ever been born or ever will be born by you speaking into a machine, even if you try to disguise your voice. God has made you uniquely. You are different than anybody else. That's why it's silly to try to compare yourself with others. Now, in the same way that your uniqueness is what gives you value, because you're a designer original, there is nobody exactly like you. So the Bible says comparing yourselves with yourselves is really stupid. Or actually it says unwise, because there's no basis of comparing two designer originals. But not only are you a unique original, but your attraction gift is unique. Some people like big cars, some people like small cars, some people like two-door cars, some people like four-door cars, some people like... Just go out into the parking lot anywhere and look at the variety of cars that people are attracted to. Look at the variety of hairstyles. Look at the variety of clothing that we buy and wear. Look at the variety of houses people want to build or live in. There are all kinds of pictures of the uniqueness of what attracts us. Some people want to live in deserts. Some people want to live in the mountains. Some people want to live right on a lake. There's different kinds of attraction. Have you ever heard someone say, "What does she see in him?" I can't see what she sees in him. All that really indicates. Have you been saying that about my wife? You have. What does she see? All that really indicates is that we have unique attraction. We're attracted to different things. Why? Because that is the beauty of how God has designed us. Don't be pressed into the mold that you need to be attracted to the same things that attract other people. However, when I talk about uniqueness, we need to know there's a difference between uniqueness and character weakness. See, what we're having in our society today is people are saying, well, my uniqueness is I have to fornicate. No, that's not your uniqueness, that's your character weakness. Well, my uniqueness is I steal. You see, if you tell me you have a chromosome that causes you to be a homosexual, I say I got a chromosome that makes me want to have sex with children. What about that? I was born this way. Well, we're not ready to accept that. So nothing we are physically, as I said before, causes us to sin. So don't confuse your uniqueness with your character weakness. Don't say, well, I'm just an angry person. I've got a bad temper. I always have, always will. My dad did, my grandfather did. So you just got to accept me for having a bad temper. No. Don't confuse uniqueness with character weakness. Character weakness can be changed. That's what Jesus died for. So if you're a murderer, that is not your uniqueness. Okay, so our attraction gift is unique. That's okay. Appreciate it. Appreciate other people's. But don't confuse uniqueness with lack of untruth and unrighteousness. All right, secondly, your attraction gift as created by God is operative towards our same sex. I like men. Can I still preach here? Some of my dearest, closest, most long-standing, deep, affectionate friendships are with men. I love them. Some of the people that I love the dearest and deepest in this world are males. Am I a homosexual? Say no. No. Am I in danger of becoming one? Say no. Am I being arrogant and boastful at the moment? I don't think so. I'm simply trying to illustrate to you what God thought up and created in you. And you have an ability to be attracted to your same sex. And you may notice that you have deep friendships with people of your same sex. It's got no connection with homosexuality or lesbianism. But because we have such a problem with that in our society, we're confused about, well, how can this be working? We will make it clear to you as we go through these lectures, so stick with me here. But before we can cure the problems, we need to know what God created and know who we are really as He created us. All right? Letter C. C comes after B. The third function of your attraction gift is it's operative towards the opposite sex. The opposite sex. Raise your hand if you've noticed that you're attracted to the opposite sex. One hand will do. Got a guy in the back there with his leg up. I don't know what that means. But how many of you who raised your hands have wondered at times if there was something deficient about your Christianity that allowed you to be attracted to the opposite sex? It is amazing how many Christian young people have come to me over the years saying, I'm attracted to the opposite sex and the opposite sex is attracted to me. I wonder if there's something wrong with me. And we really have this. Does everybody else feel this way? Do I think like other people think? Is there something wrong with me, or do I need to get closer to Jesus? And if I get really holy and really into Christianity, maybe this will dry up and go away. We have to understand God has gifted you and made you to be attracted to the opposite sex. It's part of what He made. I like women. Can I still preach here? Some of my dearest, deepest, long-standing, deep, affectionate friendships are with women. I love them. I look forward to meeting them. They are my friends. You say, we've heard about you American preachers traveling around. Boy, we'd like to keep our eye on you. Am I an adulterer? Say no. No. Am I in danger of becoming one? Does not have to happen. Let me tell you what I was raised on as a Christian young person. Had evangelists come in the churches that I attended, and they'd say, I tell you, since I met my little wife right over here at the piano, there's no other woman in the world that's attractive to me. Well, number one, that's a lie. And everybody in that congregation knows it's a lie because there's 100 women in that room that feel like they're kind of attractive. So why do we say stuff like that? Because we're trying to prove to people we're integritous in our relationship with God and in our morality. But listen, God has made us to be attracted, and it has no connection to violations of truth. And so when I stand up here, and this is the reason I'm saying it the way I do, and I say I like women, your eyes get really big and you're saying, well, what do you mean by that? You better watch out, boy. I like men, and you go, well, what do you mean by that? You better watch out. And it's true, we better watch out. But let me show you something. If I were to go out here in the parking lot and say to you, is this your car? Yeah. I really like your car. This is a nice car. I mean, this is the kind of car I really am attracted to. I like the color. I like the model. I like who made the car. I've driven it, and I love the performance of your car. This is a great car. You don't turn to your friend and say, lock the car. Dean likes the car. Watch him, keep an eye on him. He likes my car, he's attracted to my car. It doesn't enter your head that my attraction to your car is linked in any way to stealing the car. So when I say I like men, why do you get your eyes really big and say, well, how, well, you know, when I say I like women, your eyes get really big because you go, well, yeah, but you can't. It shouldn't enter your head that your attraction to either your same sex or the opposite sex is in any way connected to a violation of truth called adultery and homosexuality. We need to understand that our attraction gift can work functionally quite apart from violations of truth. That's the confusion. Here's where we've been, folks, even as Christians. We go, because I'm attracted to somebody of the same sex or the opposite sex, this must mean that I am sanctioned in my function of violating God's truth. Because they're so attractive and I'm attracted to them, therefore this ought to be able to happen. So we let it happen. We are confusing attraction with functions that are outside of God's truth. Before we can deal with that confusion, we have to understand what God has made. Because then we often, when we become Christians, say, the only way to beat this is to deny that I have attraction. And we really have a rough time doing that, and usually put it really deep inward and think and live an outward Christian life like we're not attracted to anybody, but have an inward guilt and condemnation knowing that we are, and thinking, I must not have a deep enough work of the cross in my life. I must not be close enough to Jesus, and I'm probably the only person in my church who feels this way. So in order to cure this, we have to understand God gave me attraction. I appreciate an interface with people of both sexes. They are my friends. It has got no connection to homosexuality and to adultery. It doesn't have to culminate in that. We need to be able to understand that we can care about each other and embrace one another and appreciate friendships with one another without assuming that it's getting closer and closer to some kind of violation of truth. I can appreciate your house, appreciate your car. I can love that that farm and say, wow, what a beautiful, I love that, I'm so attracted to that, without even considering the fact that I might want to steal it or burn it down or do something wrong about it. And the same is true that I can appreciate friendships with people without allowing in my consideration the possibility of adultery or homosexuality.